Ys, the ideal utopia. Once a country so peaceful and prosperous. A country where children were as free as the wind. A country where harmony blew through the hearts of all men. How could such a land of promise simply vanish from the face of the planet? 700 years before Adal set out to unfold the mystery, the land of Ys got isolated from the rest of the world during a demon invasion. This is the story of Ys' origin. From the moment that I started this series of videos, I wanted to end it on this game in particular. Not only because it would be easier to cover the prequel after all the numbered entries, or because it would be a nice way to tie everything back together to the start of the series, but mostly because Ys' origin is a gigantic celebration of entries in the past. Something that hasn't changed between its initial release and now. Origin is the third and final game to use the Ark of Nepishtim engine, tying together gameplay elements of both titles previously in it and improving on them. It also takes us to the backstory of Ys Book 1 and 2, fleshing out the events further and creating additional connections back to the Ark era of Ys lore. Ys' origin follows the events leading up to the complete isolation and downfall of the floating country of Ys. Not long before the game starts, the twin goddesses, Fina and Rhea, have both disappeared from their shrine without telling anyone, including the 6 priests. A search party is established consisting of 4 knights and 4 mages in the hopes of finding them again. While being teleported down to the mainland, the group gets scattered before all making their way to the Darm Tower. From there, they make their way up the monster-infested tower in the hopes of finding the goddesses before anything happens to them. When you first start off the game, you get to pick between 2 characters, Unica Tova and Hugo Fact, both with family names that should be familiar to people who have played the first 2 games in the series. The characters play very differently from each other, and each have their own take on the story. Think of it like picking between Chris and Jill in the original Resident Evil. I'll be taking a look at their gameplay and characters separately, but I won't be spoiling their narrative arc. I'd rather that people are allowed to experience them for themselves. From the House of Tova, Unica is a headstrong, high-energy young girl who has sworn to protect the goddesses as a little girl, before realizing the reality that her complete lack of magical aptitude would get in her way of fulfilling this childhood dream. Everyone in Ys had natural magical aptitude to some degree, and lacking that, Unica always thought of herself as lesser than everyone else. Despite what she considers a major handicap, she made the cut to become an apprentice knight and, despite the protests of her superiors, managed to force her way into the search party at the Darm Tower when the twin goddesses disappeared, hoping that this would be the time to fulfill her promise to Rhea and Fina. Charging headfirst into the danger without thinking of the consequences, in the hopes her self-doubt wouldn't catch up with her. The character arc where she internalizes her surroundings and reflects on her own abilities as well as those of others around her is some of the best writing that the series has to offer. Unica Tova is without a doubt my favorite character, not just in the Ys series but in Falcom games in general. It's astounding just how well her journey is handled. Unica's gameplay is somewhere between Adal and Ark of Nepishtim and Oath in Felghana. While this might sound redundant, as those games are mostly the same, there are a few big changes in how the character worked between the 2 titles, and in Origin a lot of the differences between the 2 games are put together and improved upon strongly. All the regular attacks that you'd expect are there, with the normal attacks on the ground, the downward stab with the stun property when landing it just right, as well as a lunge attack that has a similar input to dash jumping from Ark of Nepishtim. Surprisingly, having to press the direction you're facing once before attacking after a short delay is not as infuriating to do in combat as it is in platforming sections. Maybe it's the lack of precision needed, with a less aggressive feeling of failure when you mess it up while attacking, because either way you're going to land an attack on an enemy, compared to when jumping, you either fail to jump or end up missing the jump when you finally do it. Your reward for properly pulling off a launch attack is degrading the opponent's defenses. So it's something that's worth messing around with, but not important to a degree that you absolutely have to use it. Boost mode from Oath and Felghana makes a return, giving you the extra attack power needed to clean up groups of enemies faster. It's accompanied by the magic system from Ark of Napishtim, giving you a 3-weapon system, each with their own spell tied to it. Although this time you get 2 weapons, as 2 spells are tied to Yunika's axe and the third is tied to her father's sword. You get the Whirlwind Blade attack and Electric Hammer for Yunika's axe, functioning identically to the skills found in Oath and Felghana, with the Whirlwind attack having Yunika spinning her axe around her, allowing her to float through the air and make bigger jumps. And the Electric Hammer dealing big damage and crushing walls, like Dogi. Her third ability, tied to her oversized sword, allows you to fire projectiles. This time all 3 weapons have a shared MP pool, so you can't charge up all 3 weapons for their big attack, as charging an attack is something you do by holding down the magic button after finding the upgrades, just like in Oath and Felghana. The charged versions of attacks usually do the same thing but better. The Whirlwind Blade has your attacks stay around you for longer while you're still free to use your normal version or other attacks as the charged one lingers around you. The Electric Hammer impacts the ground so hard it shoots a projectile high into the air above you, which helps dealing with enemies in the air or certain bosses. And the fire projectiles become a gigantic phoenix of death, killing everything in the way. It's worth noting that the regular attack swings of her sword are also much wider, longer, and slower than that of the axe to make up for the higher damage and how much of an advantage its ability gives you, especially during boss fights. The buff potion system from Oath and Felghana makes a return as well, which helps keep the pace of the game up by a lot. For anyone who hasn't seen the Oath and Felghana review, the buff potion system has enemies dropping potions that temporarily boost your base stats upon picking them up, giving you a better attack, defense, and magic regeneration for a long enough time to push forward to the next group of enemies that are likely going to drop more potions so you can keep your buffs up if you can keep up with the momentum of the game. Besides this, experience rates get boosted based on your combo, which isn't dropped by taking hits but rather time, with a similar meter like your potions, with the maximum amount effectively doubling your experience income. This experience boosting system has 2 direct results. If you need to grind enemies, killing monsters in rapid succession gives you more experience faster, giving you more of a reason to keep hammering at those bigger monsters because the experience rate will keep going up the more you hammer away at them. But enemies you're over-leveled for tend to die before you can get too many hits in, lowering the amount of bonus experience you're able to get from them in an effort to stop you from over-leveling too much. This is besides the typical leveling system of Falcom games where stronger enemies give you more experience, while the ones you're too strong for barely give you any. It's not a perfect solution to speeding up or stopping grind, but it does get the job done better than most games do. From the House of Fact, Yugos is a magical prodigy, believing himself to be more sophisticated and smarter than everyone around him, when in reality he's a poor judge of character, stuck up, and a straight-up asshole to everyone surrounding him. When the twin goddesses disappear, he volunteered to join the search party, not because he gives a damn about the goddesses or their well-being, but because his father gave him the orders to find and kill someone who was spotted on the island below. His arrogance didn't come out of nowhere, as there are a lot of issues that never got worked out within the Fact family. And it's not even that Yugos hates everyone surrounding him, it's that the way that he was raised never permitted him a life where he could develop normal relationships with other people. His character arc is really interesting, because in a lot of ways it's the exact opposite of Yunika's. Not only does he overestimate his abilities greatly, he lusts for even more power, driving everyone near him away for the sake of obtaining it. Generally, a story arc like this is reserved for a rival character who ends up driving themselves mad with their quest for power, while everyone ends up excusing them near the end. But Yugos is repeatedly pointed towards his problems whenever he crosses the line, and boy does he ever cross the line. Yugos gameplay is what I'd describe as Ys Book 2, but modernized. Instead of having close-ranged attacks, he's got a magical staff and the Eyes of Fact, 2 satellites hovering beside him, which makes his gameplay feel more like a weird top-down shooter than anything. To offset how overpowered it is for a character to consistently attack outside of the enemy's range, shooting locks him to the ground, adding a small delay to jumping, which makes it harder to dodge incoming attacks. His version of the lunge attack, the power shot, has a longer range, making it easier to safely get in multiple defense debuff hits on enemies before they can come close enough to damage you. He takes more damage and has less health than Unica, but his gameplay is still a lot easier in general. When activating Boost Mode, Hugo gains 2 additional satellites that help you mow down enemies even faster, which when put next to his magical abilities renders most enemies and some bosses almost entirely trivial. Hugo's Whirlwind attack is a shield that blocks 1 incoming hit or multiple when charged up. As long as the shield is intact, your falling speed decreases, allowing you to float through the air. It also grants him the power of bump combat. The hammer is replaced with remote mines, which when charged up ends up killing most enemies in the game in 1 hit, even when under-leveled. It's so useful that I pretty much exclusively used it to attack for most of the game because the short time it takes to recharge after placing a fully charged one is so short you can continuously keep placing them one after another. After placing a charged mine, pressing the button to place another mine instantly detonates the first one, so it's not even hard to get enemies caught in the blast. Most bosses don't really stand a chance against it either. His third skill makes the 2 Eyes of Fact rotate around him while dealing fire damage, and when charged, it fires 1 big laser beam. It's alright, but outside of a few minor cases during boss fight, it's not as useful as the mines or shield. At 2 points I nearly fell asleep playing as him. I just didn't like the focus on projectile combat in Ys 2, and I'm not the biggest fan of Hugo's gameplay in Ys Origin either. I wouldn't go as far as to call it bad. The base mechanics at play in Ys Origin are solid enough that even the least interesting character can still be miles ahead of most other action RPGs, so it does balance out in a way. Though his story is actually really good and completely worth going through his gameplay for. As a general recommendation, I'd say go through his story when replaying the game instead of opening with him. Seeing the other perspective on events and how differently he interacts with everyone is very interesting. Something that always stands out to me about Ys Origin is that how, despite the entire game takes place in one single tower, the game never feels like you're stuck in the same place the entire time. Every floor is not just visually distinct from each other, but you really feel like you're going through varied environments in general. The visual presentation, music, and design choices for the areas are all so distinct that the game feels like it has way more environmental variety than most games that have entire cities to explore. The rate at which you keep getting weapon upgrades, new abilities, and encounter new enemy types and obstacles all help keep things fresh the entire game long. Which isn't to say that the game is all that long, but even across multiple playthroughs, the game still keeps feeling varied due to how distinct the playstyles between the characters are. What's also nice is that, like in other Ys titles, you can quick travel between save points at pretty much any time in the game that isn't a boss fight. And there's quite a few locations you can warp to this time around. That's not the only thing you can do at save points either. Ys Origin has an SP system where enemies drop tiny purple crystals upon killing them that you can collect to purchase special upgrades at save points with. Every armor tier has an upgrade you can give it to increase its defensive value, just like an Oath in Felghana, but besides this, you can basically increase a lot of your stats directly in this menu. So you can increase your movement speed, MP regeneration speed, boost regeneration speed, stun timer on enemies, or decrease your own status affliction timers. It gives you a secondary thing to improve on while grinding, which helps the speed of the game up by the smallest bit. Though I think the biggest benefit is just the mental one in the moments where you do find yourself underleveled and pushed to kill a bunch of enemies, because there's a second resource with more direct benefits than gold typically gives you in these games. Boss fights in Ys Origin are the best they've ever been. Every boss is visually distinct and has easy to distinguish and read patterns of their own. During Oath and Vogana, there were a few bosses where I had visibility issues, like the Ice Dragon, or bosses where certain mechanics were finicky enough that I felt like I was doing the right thing, but it wasn't working anyway. Or something just finicky enough that using certain abilities, like the punch you get from the Terror Bracelet that lets you ignore damage, lets you skip most mechanics during fights. Instead of allowing this level of trivialization that Oath and Vogana let you get away with, Origin has most bosses give you clear windows in which they're vulnerable that you have to earn by damaging certain parts of them enough first. Often putting extra hazards in the way that, when not dealt with fast enough, can heal most bosses again, increasing the length of the fight. While this sounds like it would make everything a slog, it couldn't be further from the truth. The fights typically don't overstay their welcome, having varied enough patterns to get through before you make it your turn to do damage to them again. A lot of bosses have special attacks they'll only do as they're becoming vulnerable or leaving this phase. Others go into a special enraged phase near death that changes things up while still playing by the same rules they originally did, so the mix-ups are never too cheap. Though the big flashy boss fights aren't the only bosses. You often fight people your own size, with several rival-style fights against various enemies being spread during your journeys, no matter who you play as. These fights generally don't have periods of vulnerability that you have to open up, but instead often put themselves into a temporary state of invulnerability when damaged enough. Having the reverse happen for fights on the opposite end of the scale is a nice touch, and since their stronger state is a reflection of your ability to boost, it still makes everything feel fair and consistent. Like they're playing by your rules. It's something that I felt was missing in Oath and Vogana especially, but not so much in Ark of Napishtim. Bosses are playing by very consistent rules, ones that don't feel too far removed from your own, and I think this is why I don't mind bumping up the difficulty in Origin more than the other Ark Engine titles. Though, for the sake of capturing footage for this review, I've kept everything set to normal. I only wanted to get through the game again so I could talk about it, since this is my favorite Ys title and I'm familiar enough with it to begin with. Something that is generally underappreciated in reviews for Ys Origin is that a fairly large portion of the boss fights are reimagined versions of bosses from Ys Book 1 and 2, with the standout fight being the one against the centipede Nighttilger. Smashing body parts while moving aside explosive orbs and running on top of him are all really fun, and so much better than running in a circle from the right angle. People often say they'd really love an Ys 1 remake in the Ark Engine, but in some ways this is already it. Several major bosses from the original game come back in a new form, and it's interesting how different the change in gameplay has been to them. Though if I have to be honest, I'm not as fond of Yoglex and Almogen in Origin as I am in the original. It's mostly because what I especially liked about the fight in the original game is a shortened phase during this fight, and the focus isn't entirely on them either. Granted, doing a full fight in the original style might not exactly be as interesting as it used to be when put next to the rest of the combat in the game. Hit and run tactics work a lot better with bump combat. So let's talk about the elephant claw in the room. Because I know some people are especially wary of it, there's a timestamp on the screen where spoilers end right now. I'm not going to spoil the story either way, and I'm not going to give too much away. But if you'd rather not know about the thing coming up, you can skip to that point. Though that said, this isn't the best kept secret either way. In Ys Origin, there's actually 3 groups exploring the tower at the same time. The 4 knights, the 4 mages, but there's also 4 outsiders, who the other 2 groups keep running into during their storylines. You know how earlier in this review I compared the character select screen to Resident Evil? Well, what if Resident Evil 1 let you play as Wesker after you beat it? On the PC release, you have to beat the game once with either character, and on the console release, you have to beat the game as both characters. But once you do, you unlock Clau. Now, I'm not going to spoil the story or character of Clau, or even talk about who he is. There's no real secret as to Clau being in the game. He's in the promotional art for the game, he's often featured prominently on box arts and splash screens, so we all know he's here. But for those who don't know who he is and with interest in this game, I'd rather spare you these details and have you experience them for yourself. I don't know which unlock method I'd prefer, by the way. While it would be nice to go from Unica's gameplay straight into Claw's, story-wise you're way more up to speed with him from Yugos' perspective. Beating the game with both characters is totally fine as a requirement. I timed how long it took me to beat the game between the 2 characters and I was still under 18 hours of playtime with both characters combined before starting with the 3rd character. Clau is a short-range glass cannon. He attacks with a sequence of swipes from his gigantic claws. His lunge attack gives him a longer range slide to help close the gap faster while still keeping up the defensive debuff attribute. But even his base movement speed is already a lot higher than Unica or Yugos. His attacks don't deal that much damage per hit, but the speed at which he delivers successive blows means you're still mowing down enemies really fast. Now add to this that his combat style really favors keeping up a good combo rating for his experience multiplier, and you can probably imagine just how much faster Clau breezes through the game. Instead of a hovering ability, Clau gets a Blink Strike. Since this covers less ground than both Unica and Hugo's versions of the Whirlwind attacks, the dungeon layout in areas where you needed this to progress or get treasure chests has been slightly altered, usually placing a lowered ceiling with spikes under it that you have to blink through in its place, as blinking makes you completely invulnerable to damage you're speeding past. Charging it up increases the ground covered when blinking. When boosted, the areas he's blinking past have small explosions coming out of the ground, dealing extra damage. His wall crushing ability is an explosive jab that deals a ton of damage, with the charged up version creating a bigger blast to hit larger amounts of enemies, and the boosted version sucking enemies into it to hit even more of them. It's a great ability to quickly take care of groups of enemies. His fire ability has him do a small spinning jump that makes you completely invulnerable to damage during the period that the attack is going, which while doing it on a flat surface will be the entire time your feet are off the ground. It also deals a decent amount of damage, especially the charged versions, which makes this one of the most useful attacks during a lot of the boss fights. Clau fights all of the same big bosses as Unica and Hugo, with a few extra additions that, for spoiler reasons, I'd rather not show. Overall, the boss fights that Unica and Hugo don't fight are harder to approach, since they're balanced around his speed, leaving less room for weak points in their motions unless you create them for yourself by interrupting their attacks. During the shared bosses, the change in how his abilities work really come to show, since Hugo and Unica's abilities are more focused around mobility and utility outside of combat. Clau cleans most of them up really fast if you're aggressive enough, although you almost have to be, with how little a beating he's allowed to take. His blink being able to go through projectiles and his fire attack allowing you to attack right through their attacks when timed right makes the fights feel really tense, since the slightest mistiming hurts you way more than it ever did Hugo, who, during the worst of it, could at least summon a shield. It's really hard to talk about Clau without saying too much of the story, but I really don't want to spoil his deal, as his story is generally considered the true path. The three characters all go through the same timeline of events with big differences based on who you play as, with the changes usually made directly by the character you're playing as being the one taking the initiative with everything. Because of this, you often get to see the supporting cast respond to things differently, since the perspective of events has changed so much. And with all of that said, Claw's events are the ones that end up aligning the most with the original Ys 1's backstory. If you think Clau is the end of the game, then, well, yeah, you're not totally wrong. But there's still a lot more to explore in Ys origin beyond the three campaigns, like the unlockable time attack mode, the arena mode, unlockable gameplay variants of the three characters, and a lot of difficulty options. Though the base game takes about 8 hours per character to beat, there's still a lot of gameplay that you can choose to continue with if you're left wanting for more, or if you're fine with leaving it after the characters, you're completely justified too. In fact, just playing the game as Unica alone should give you a perfectly enjoyable and satisfying experience, even if going through the other characters creates a much more satisfying result. As you've probably noticed so far, the music in Ys Origin is fantastic. It is in the entire series, with the exception of Mask of the Sun and Lost Kevin, but something about the arrangements, instrument choice, and original compositions in Origin really gets to me. There's some really solid arrangements of music from past Ys titles, with the most obvious being the Tower of Shadow of Death when you enter the dungeon properly. Being able to compare the different takes of that song and other parts of the tower is really fun. It gives you a sense that the series has really gone through a lot over the years. The area and boss themes are fantastic, and the boss themes better be, with how often you're likely to hear them the first time you're playing the game, or the attempts at higher difficulties if you're making any. If I haven't made it clear enough, Ys Origin is my favorite entry in the series. I was interested to see if my opinions would change after having gone through the entire series through the course of the year, both old and new, but if anything, it has deepened my appreciation of the game by a lot. While you could technically start here and get a fantastic experience out of it either way, I would still advise new players to at least give the 2 modern bump combat entries, 1 and 2 Chronicles, a shot before playing Origin, since the importance of a lot of what happens will mean so much more to you coming from it with an understanding of the world and lore surrounding the game. But it serves its purpose as both a standalone title and a prequel remarkably well. Anyway, this was AboveUp, and this doesn't just end this review, this is kind of the end of the Ys series in general on this channel. I might come back for Memories of Celceta and maybe the weird DS titles in the future, but not anytime soon. I want to focus on some other stuff, because I've basically just done Ys this year and that's it. I'm really happy with how the series has gone. I think I've actually improved a lot as an editor since starting it. I bit off way more than I could chew when I started, and I didn't really think everything through. If I knew how hard this would have been, I probably would have never started it, but now that it's over, I'm glad that I did. I'm also really happy for everyone who has come here and watched these videos and appreciated Ys along with me. It has been a really great journey, and I'm glad we've all been able to get through this. After this, I am going to take a short break. There won't be major videos during January. Maybe I'll make a video for Christmas, I'm not entirely sure yet. This doesn't mean that I'm not gonna do anything in January. I'm gonna prepare for a bunch of videos that are gonna come out starting February. I kinda just want to get a head start on a bunch of stuff so I don't overwhelm myself and chase my old deadlines the way that I have been doing with these Ys videos. As always, this video has been brought to you by people who have supported me on Patreon. If you enjoyed these videos and would like to see more like this, maybe head over to patreon.com/AboveUp and you can become one of the scrolling people that you see on this channel. Anyway, this was AboveUp and I will see ya.